Chapter 22. Ding ding in this corner. On March 12, 2009, Opie and I had an on-air fight known as the Grape argument. I was eating grapes on the air. I remarked on something and Opie said, "Are you going to wait until you finish those?" This argument had nothing to do with the fucking grapes. It was like any argument. You start out with the issue and then it just splinters into 1,000 things that pissed you off 10 years prior. He was obviously mad at something. So I said, "Oh really? You're going to give me shit about the grapes? I could read you 20 texts about you scraping your yogurt container." How petty was this? He gave me this face that I knew all too well. This pissed off face. Opie kept saying, "Leave it alone." But I didn't want to leave it alone. Then he quipped, "Just because you're really into doing the show again, leave it alone." To which I replied, "As opposed to when I wasn't really into doing the show?" That was it. I saw fucking red. He had passive-aggressively suggested I wasn't into the show for a certain period of time. Opie then said, "Don't worry, dude. This will be over soon. You go your way, and I'll go mine." How prophetic he was. For months he had been alluding to this inevitable breakup on air. "It's just time to break up. We've done everything there is to do together, and it's time for us to move on to some new challenges." I told him, "I actually enjoy coming in here to do this show, and don't bitch about every little thing going on, and I try to keep it light." Opie just started giving me a litany of gripes he had against me. He complained I was constantly on my phone and missing a lot of shows due to whatever the fuck I had going on in my life. Then I called him out on his bullshit. The personal days he had taken off, and the time he had questioned my sick day when I was legitimately sick and had a fever and the flu. One of his biggest points of the argument was that I had called out with little to no notice. He then said to me, "Could do other things." I fired back, "No, you couldn't." And he replied, "I could easily do another show." I told him, "What are you going to do? Spin records again?" He said, "What are you going to do? Make fun of me? My whole problem with you is that I don't like you or respect you. I just think we're moving in... It isn't that I don't like you or respect you. I just think we're moving in two different directions. We've made a great living together for 14 years, and I'd rather move on before things get ugly." We both knew there were feelings of resentment and animosity that had been percolating for a long time. Opie made it very clear he wanted to split up. He basically was proposing a split right then and there. The irony is that even when we were fighting, we did great radio together. That segment was entertaining, compelling, and yes, still funny. Toward the very end of this segment, things were starting to cool down, and I said, "Hey, do you want a grape?" Classic. 1 year into our run at WNEW, we brought Jim Norton onto the show as a regular. He originally came on as a guest with Andrew Dice Clay and was clearly something very special. He stuck out and was just killing it. We eventually started having him come on by himself, and he was consistently funny and said and thought about things Opie and I didn't. A lot of funny people came on, but Jimmy fit the show perfectly. He started joining us 2 or 3 times a week. His becoming a full-time member was a slow, natural evolution. Then we got him some money to come in. The station started paying him, and it was working very nicely. Opie went balls out to get Jimmy on the show. With the Melinda situation, I think Jimmy might have seen we were not as friendly as we used to be, and that we should get someone else in there to be a buffer. One day I walked into work very close to 6 again, and Opie was pissed. I sat down in my seat, and I was watching him talk to Jimmy. He purposely went out of his way not to make eye contact with me. That was his tactic of letting me know he was mad, not looking at me. I grabbed my phone and texted Jimmy saying, "The fucking cunt won't even make eye contact with me." And I hit send, and it went to Opie. I had accidentally sent it to Opie. I put the phone down and just sat and stared at Opie's phone, and I saw it light up with the text I'd sent. I saw him look at his phone, then he looked at me and said, "What the fuck is this shit?" I was like, "What?" "This," he said, holding up his phone. "Oh yeah, I was talking about, I was trying to lie, and then I realized there wasn't any getting out of this, and just said, 'Yeah, well, you're fucking not, so fuck you.'" This was 2 minutes before showtime. He was like, "You motherfucker, fuck you. Who were you sending this to?" I quickly responded, "My chick." I didn't want to hang Jimmy out to dry. So I told him I was sending it to my girlfriend at the time, Melissa. He got livid and left the studio. He left the show. The other time he refused to work with me was when I went to his brother's restaurant and couldn't get a beer. No one was serving me, so I did what any grown man would do. I tweeted. I wrote, "Geez, you would think I can get a fucking beer here." Opie got so pissed and lost his mind. He was wondering why I hadn't just texted him. He was being protective of his brother's place, which I totally get. I was already annoyed at him overall and thought it was a good way to piss him off. Immature? Yeah. Enjoyable? Absolutely. He didn't come to work for 2 days. I showed up 2 days in a row and did the show with Jimmy. It was great, but my boss told me, "You better fucking apologize to him." Opie wasn't showing up to work and I was the one who had to square it. They knew he wasn't coming in till I apologized. Everyone knew Opie was the sensitive one. I bit my tongue and said, "I'm sorry," and eventually came back. I apologized for the text and the tweet. I constantly felt like I was with a chick. It was like having a girlfriend. You have words with a guy buddy and it goes, "I was being an asshole. It's okay, bro. Go fuck yourself. Okay, man, let's have a beer. Okay, cool." With Opie, it was like, when we communicate, I really feel like you're not opening up enough. What the fuck? What was this? Guys don't talk this way. We'd been running like this for a while. The shows were great, but we knew there was a dark cloud over the studio. That said, we didn't let it affect the show. It was always an issue when Opie was in a room or studio with a bunch of comics. Patrice O'Neill, Rich Voss, Jimmy Norton, and Colin Quinn. We would be trading barbs and just laughing our asses off. Nothing funnier than being in the barrel. You say something stupid, they all fucking jump on you. You're in it. You're trying to battle to get out. I love that shit. It's like a game. Opie would sit there like the kid who didn't want to be called on by the teacher. Like, "Don't mention my name, don't point at me." I think his not being a part of that brought on a lot of animosity. We were all laughing and having a great time, and he was the one who had to say, "Okay, let's take a break." The listeners were like, "Really, man? You're gonna stop these guys?" He had a job to logistically structure the show, but to the listener, everyone was having fun, and he was the guy who just cut it off. So he caught shit for it, and I think he didn't have the personality and thick skin to handle it. He would take a lot of that shit personally. The comics were aware of this. I'd see some of the most vicious comics not saying anything to him, and I'd know why they weren't doing it. Everyone in the room was supposedly fair game, and we get some of the funniest guys who could rip anyone apart, not giving him one bit of flack because they knew he might just not invite them back. That was the dynamic between the comics and Opie at that point. Opie would give Rich Voss shit. Rich was an easy target for everyone. "Oh, you're stupid and you can't spell and you talk funny." Rich is known for destroying and picking apart his audiences unmercifully, and yet he always gave Opie a pass. It didn't build any animosity with me or the comics because there were plenty of people to rag on in the room. It built up Opie's animosity because he knew he couldn't hang in the barrel. He knew he wasn't up to snuff, and it made him feel inadequate. After a while, the resentment started to rear its ugly head, because I think he saw his role becoming diminished in the actual stuff that was going out over the air. You want to hear, "Holy fuck, that was hilarious. Wow, that was funny. You and Rich today, you and Jimmy." It was always Jimmy and me connecting comedically with our guests or each other. Jimmy and I had this sixth sense chemistry that was at a whole different level. Opie started getting like, I'm pretty utilitarian here. Even though he was the one driving this fucking show in the right direction. That isn't what people comment on social media about. You never heard people giving him the accolades like, "You really know how to navigate the funny guys." To say the popularity of our show went to Opie's head would be an understatement. He had this delusion that we were so big we needed security to protect us. I understood if we were out at a bar doing a show and there was I'm pretty sure that someone drunk, I'm pretty sure that's a possibility, that someone drunk could get rambunctious. But it actually got to the point at Sirius where Club Soda Kenny would walk Opie from our studio to the bathroom in our already overly secure high-rise building. What the fuck could possibly happen in between the studio and the bathroom? It's a hallway in an office space that's run by Sirius. It was this weird elevated sense of importance that Opie constantly had. He figured if he needed security to walk him to the bathroom, he must be a big shot. The reality was he told the security guard to walk him to the bathroom. I would get up and go to the bathroom sometimes, and Kenny would get ready to walk with me, and I'd say, "Kenny, I think I'm okay. I can make it to the bathroom and hold my own dick while I pee." Kenny would walk Opie everywhere, from the parking garage to places he went outside the building after the show. He would drive him home after the show. It made no sense whatsoever that either of us would need a security guard. Howard Stern was a different story, and I think that always tortured Opie. Howard had something, and Opie wanted the same thing because he thought he was just as good and important as Howard. I was like, no, Howard really does need security. He has fans everywhere that want to mob the guy. He's one of the most recognizable stars in the world. We would walk outside, and occasionally there'd be 2 or 3 people who'd want to take a picture, which was fine. If Howard had walked out every day, there would have been a crowd of people wanting his picture, and someone could possibly have gotten out of hand. He'd have needed a guy there so he can get to his car safely. Opie had that in his head and wanted the same shit Howard had. He couldn't understand why we weren't getting it from the company. It was absurd to try and compare our celebrity status with Howard's. Every time Opie would leave to go to the bathroom with Kenny escorting him, the second the door would close, we'd break out in laughter. What the fuck? Was the 70s on 7 Girl DJ going to take a poke at him? Was Martha Quinn from MTV going to smack him or something? Fame went to his head more than anyone else's. I always took everything with a grain of salt and with the idea that I couldn't even believe any of this was happening. We'd go to a club and there were a lot of fans while we'd do our stage show. Opie would want a VIP area backstage and to be ushered out to a waiting vehicle. I would finish and head for the bar to hang out with people and drink. I'd be doing shots and enjoying myself. Opie thought if he did this, he would have been mobbed and surrounded by people bugging him for autographs. I think that he knew deep down inside it wouldn't happen and didn't want to fuck up his fantasy. If he had gone to the bar and didn't have a bunch of people clamoring around him, his fantasy of being more than what he really was would instantly have been shattered. I loved the interaction with our fans and always had a blast. It was like a built-in party that I was the host of, but didn't have to worry about cleaning up after. Fans would constantly call Opie out on that. Opie blew me off and didn't talk to me. We definitely had a different way of approaching our fans and dealing with them. I always felt like it was a mutual one-on-one, mano-a-mano thing. His idea was pure fantasy. He lived his life like that fantasy was the reality. He sequestered himself. He wouldn't let people see pictures of him or his family. Really? What was he, John Paul Getty? I don't know who that is. If he didn't want to put pictures out there, that was fine. But I know why he didn't. It was to perpetuate this false fantasy that there was droves of people wishing to do him some type of harm. More than just websites calling him an asshole. It was never the case. I will say I appreciated and understood the importance of his role. But for Opie, the guy who started the show, to not receive praise, well, it started to getting to him. I think of that movie, The Prestige. Still gotta watch that. In which Hugh Jackman has to drop onto the stage and his lookalike comes up and takes the bows for the biggest trick he did. He's under the stage listening to the crowd explode and loving it. But he's like, fuck, I'm not the one standing in front of the audience. That's exactly what I think Opie started feeling at some point. Almost ignored and taken for granted. It was one of those behind-the-scenes things. Because of this, he would act out and take it out on other people, one of whom was yours truly. I'm not trying to make myself out to be golden. Truth is, I brought many negatives to the table too. But I always felt that the fans of the show gravitated towards me because I made myself available to them. I'd tweet, "I'm going to be jamming with my brother at this bar. Come out." Or, "I'm going to be partying, wherever, tonight." Opie was much more private, and I certainly didn't fault him for that. But the fans knew I was more accessible, and it resonated with them, and I feel it made me more popular in their eyes. They would say, "I was with Anthony last night. Holy shit, I had a blast. Really cool. Hung out and talked for a while." Opie was standoffish to most fans. When social media really started kicking up, it became obvious there was a fucking hatred of Opie. It was so weird because it was almost too much. It was like this guy had to have done something to the show's fans personally for them to have said this kind of vicious shit about him. It turned out they just didn't like him. I had my share of that as well. People said terrible things, but it's part of the game. I like sniping back at them and dishing it out too. Chapter 23. The tweet heard round the world. I had just finished doing the TV show Red Eye on Fox News, and I went over to a great karaoke bar, Tonic, to sing a few tunes. It was around 3:30 a.m., and I decided that since I had this great camera on me, as well as a few drinks in my system, it would be a good idea to take some pictures of Times Square. The most photographed place on Earth, right? It wasn't this odd thing like, what's this guy doing taking pictures at this time of night? It's actually the perfect time to snap a few clicks there because there aren't many people around, and it's still all lit up and perfect to shoot. On this night, there was scaffolding on the sidewalk, and the bare light bulbs hanging down there made this great tunnel effect going towards where they dropped the ball for New Year's Eve. I thought it made for a great shot. I started snapping, and the camera was loud. It was a Canon reflex that made this cha-ching, cha-ching sound. There was a girl on the sidewalk walking away from me, and she heard the camera and all of a sudden turned around and said, "Uh-uh." Then she was running toward me like a lion after an antelope, calling me a white motherfucker, and started smacking me in the fucking face. I was taking shots to my head. They were open-hand smacks. She was screaming, "Don't take pictures of me." I told her, I wasn't taking pictures of you. There was no talking to her. She was in a rage. But I never felt she was even close to threatening my life, and she wasn't hurting me. I was pissed, but wasn't going to do anything. Certainly not retaliate physically. Then a couple of guys came over and said, "Don't you put your hands on her." I said, "I'm not touching her." I was putting my hand up to stop her from hitting me, and I had the other one down to protect my camera and my balls. I totally de-escalated the situation and went back to my apartment, which was 2 blocks away. I got there and was fuming, full of piss and vinegar. I was really angry, so I decided to do what any grown man in my position would do. I tweeted. If I made any mistake, it was tweeting some social commentary along with a detailed description of what I had just gone through. If I had just documented what had happened, it might have been one thing, but I wrote some stuff like, "This woman was an animal and savage behavior." I never said anything racist about it, however. It's amazing how social media misinterpreted my account of the assault on me and my anger towards this despicable person as being racist. For the record, I am not and have not been a racist. I judge people as individuals. I know the reputation I've gotten over the years, and I play that as a character. I make jokes about it. If someone brings up a racial issue, I push it to the furthest I can take it. But it's funny. It's a joke. I'm playing off the reputation I've gotten off people who really don't even know me from a hole in the wall. Truthfully, it does bother me that I'm falsely associated with this stigma, because things like this on the internet live forever, and there's no knocking them down. I got railroaded, big time. The media called it a racial tirade. I've said a lot of worse things on the airwaves at Sirius than anything I've ever tweeted, and there were never any ramifications. But off the air, I got assaulted and voiced my displeasure and got fired. Sirius used my tweets as an excuse to fire me. I think they just wanted to free up some money in the budget. I was making a lot of money, and they thought they can get rid of me and probably still hold on to listeners by holding on to Opie and Jimmy. In the past, Opie and I had always been fired together, and I never worried about it as long as our ratings were up and we had a strong fan base. This was the first time I was solo. I was like, oh, fuck, now what? Initially, I thought I could move to Pennsylvania and get a house. I had this whole scenario of uprooting everything. Why would I stay in Long Island without a job? I was going to pay a mortgage on a house in Roslyn Heights. I started to reassess everything I was doing. The first day I was fired, I had my infamous 4th of July party. I had at least 80 people at my house partying with me. Meanwhile, I had no idea what my fucking life was becoming. I had no idea what I was doing. Finally, when the music stopped and all the drinks were drunk, people started filing out of my house, and that's when it really settled in. What the fuck am I going to do now? I'm stuck. I'm damaged goods. Luckily, when I was fired, I still had a huge loyal fan base that wanted me to keep doing what I loved, which was being on the radio. And it was because of the fans that supported me that I knew I wanted to keep doing this. Since the firing until this very day, I have not spoken to Opie privately. We've texted and spoken via my podcast, but he never reached out to me when I got fired. I expected a little more from him. The thing that really got me is when they went live for the first time after I got fired. First of all, I was hoping they'd hold off on the show and say, "Hey, let's try and get Anthony back." Something. Just some kind of indication that Opie gave a fuck that I'd been fired after what we'd been doing a show together for almost 20 years. That showed me a boatload about not only the way he felt about me, but also how he felt about the show. He apparently didn't enjoy what we'd been doing. If he truly did, he would have tried to keep me on. I think Opie felt like he could do a show without me or Jimmy, and if it was successful, it would justify his talent. He'd be like, "See, I didn't need him after all." Again, as a human being, I'm glad it didn't happen. It validated me and what I knew I had brought to the show all those years. I would have hated it if things had gone well and it had been business as usual. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. Once I was fired, it was the Opie show with Jim Norton. Jimmy didn't want his name on that show. He specifically wanted to be with Jim Norton, as opposed to the Opie show, Opie and Jim show, because he knew it was going to be a disaster in the making. They just did not get along. I knew without me as a buffer, they would not last a year with each other. And I was right. They were just like oil and water. Jimmy could not get out of there fast enough. They had zero chemistry and couldn't make it work. I knew that I was that common denominator for those two to work well with each other. And I knew and understood Jimmy, and I knew and understood Opie, and I could work as the go-between. I listened to the beginning of that first show, and I was pissed. I was pissed at that bitch in Times Square for slapping me in the head. I was pissed at Sirius XM, and I was pissed at the people on the show. Overall, I was pissed at sitting at home with no prospects. No one was calling me with job opportunities. My agent wasn't telling me about a ton of offers pouring in. So I was just fucking angry, depressed, and uncertain where I was going. Opie and Jimmy started talking about my getting fired right away, and it was surreal to hear them talking about me and I wasn't there. Opie was saying, "It was so weird, man." Honestly, it didn't feel any sincerity. I didn't feel any sincerity about how weird it was. He never put across on the show that he was unhappy that it had happened. I know he wanted me gone. I never got from Opie that he was upset about my firing. It seemed like he was ready to move on, and at that point, truthfully, so was I. Opie and I had a personal relationship for 20 years that went beyond our professional one. It started out that we were very good friends. We did a lot of hanging together outside of work, and like at work, we seemed to complement each other socially. It's ironic that our show flourished regardless of our faulting friendship. I think our friendship and the show were so intertwined early on that one really depended on the other. It was so important for us to be very close. Toward the end, Opie and I were cognizant of the fact that the only thing we had together was the show. That was it, which I was fine with. I'd been in friendships that have gotten better over the years and some that have gotten worse. I have friends I've had since 1977 in high school, and we're still as tight as we were back then. Even party, we're at every party we're at, we love each other. I have other people I thought would be my best friends forever, and within a couple of years, with either moving on to a new job, I never heard from them again. I just chalked that up to what we were. Opie and I had this show in common. There was no Opie without Anthony, and conversely, there certainly wasn't an Anthony without Opie. I could never have walked into a radio studio at a high school as a high school dropout construction worker and say, "Hey, where's my mic? Where do I go here?" We both did each other justice. The sum of the two made us one of the most amazing radio shows that ever was. We owe each other immensely for what we both did together, which we couldn't have done individually. The Opie and Anthony show was a wild ride that ended in 2014. Little did I know, a new ride was just beginning.